You know what's interesting? Most people spend their entire lives working for money, but almost nobody learns how money actually works. And that's not an accident. The system is designed that way. Today, I want to talk about a book that fundamentally changed how millions of people think about wealth. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And whether you love it or hate it, you can't deny it asks questions that most of us never even think to ask. But here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to give you some surface level summary that you could get from reading the back cover. Instead, I want to dig into why you're actually broke, and more importantly, what mental models are keeping you broke, even if you don't realize it. So let's start with the most uncomfortable truth in the book. The real reason you're broke, Kiyosaki tells the story of growing up with two father figures. His biological father, the poor dad, was highly educated, worked hard his entire life, and never achieved financial security. His best friend's father, the rich dad, never finished school but built enormous wealth. Same island, same economy, completely different outcomes. Here's what most people miss. It wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't about work ethic. The poor dad worked incredibly hard. He had a PhD, he followed all the rules, and he struggled financially until the day he died. The difference was their mental programming about what money actually is and how it works. The poor dad believed in the traditional path. Go to school, get good grades, find a secure job, work your way up, save money, buy a house, and retire on a pension. This is what I call the industrial age operating system. And here's the problem. We're no longer in the industrial age, but most people are still running that outdated software. The rich dad had completely different programming. He saw money not as something you work for, but as something that should work for you. He saw businesses and investments not as risky ventures, but as the actual path to security. He saw his job not as a career, but as a temporary vehicle to gain skills and capital. Now, before you think this is going to be another one of those quit your job and start a business speeches, hold on. That's not the point. The point is much deeper and much more important. Financial literacy gap. Here's a question that should bother you. Why do they teach you calculus in school, but not how to read a financial statement? Why can you graduate college without understanding the difference between an asset and a liability? Why is there no required course on how taxes actually work? Kiyosaki argues this isn't an oversight, it's a feature, not a bug. The education system was designed during the industrial age to produce employees, not business owners. It was designed to create people who would work in factories and corporations, follow instructions, and not ask too many questions about how the system actually works. And it's brilliant in a sinister kind of way, because if you don't understand how money works, you'll spend your entire life trapped in what Kiyosaki calls the rat race. The rat race works like this. You go to school to get a job. You get a job to earn money. You earn money to buy things and pay bills. The more money you make, the more you spend. You get a raise, you upgrade your lifestyle, you get a promotion, you buy a bigger house, you're running faster and faster, but you never actually get ahead. Why? Because nobody taught you the one concept that separates the wealthy from everyone else. Assets versus liabilities. This is where Rich Dad Poor Dad gets controversial, and it's also where most people completely misunderstand the book. Kiyosaki has a very simple definition. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. That's it. It doesn't matter what accountants say. It doesn't matter what banks say. If it puts money in your pocket, it's an asset. If it takes money out, it's a liability. Now, here's where it gets interesting. By this definition, your house is not an asset. I know. Every financial advisor tells you your house is your biggest asset. But is it? Think about it. Does your house put money in your pocket every month? No. It takes money out, mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, money flowing out, not in. That makes it a liability, not an asset. This is why so many middle-class people feel broke despite having good jobs. They think they're building wealth because they're accumulating things that society calls assets. A house, a car, furniture, gadgets. But these are all liabilities. They all require money to maintain. They're not putting money in your pocket, they're taking it out. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They acquire actual assets, businesses that generate profit, real estate that produces rental income, stocks that pay dividends, intellectual property that generates royalties, things that put money in their pocket while they sleep. The middle class works for money. The wealthy have money work for them. And that's not a cute saying. That's a completely different relationship with how wealth actually works. Your job is not security now. Let's talk about something that makes people really uncomfortable. Your job is not financial security. In fact, it might be the opposite. The poor dad in the book believed that a secure job was the foundation of financial stability. And you know what? For his generation, that made sense. Pensions existed. Companies were loyal to employees. You could work for one company your whole life and retire comfortably. But that world is gone. Pensions have been replaced by 401ks where you bear all the risk. Loyalty is dead. Companies will lay you off the second it helps their quarterly numbers. Job security is an illusion that we pretend exists because it's too scary to admit the truth. Here's what Kiyosaki realized. When you have a job, you have one source of income. If that source disappears, you're in trouble. You're completely dependent on someone else's decision about whether you get to feed your family this month. That's not security, that's vulnerability disguised as stability. It gets worse. When you have a job, you also pay the highest taxes. Employees pay taxes first, then get to spend what's left. Business owners earn money, spend on their business, and then pay taxes on what's left. That's a massive difference that compounds over decades. And here's the part that really stings. When you have a job, you're building someone else's asset. Your time, your energy, your creativity, it's all going into making someone else wealthy. You're the asset on their balance sheet, generating income for them while you get just enough to keep showing up. This doesn't mean quit your job tomorrow. That's stupid advice. What it means is understand what a job actually is. It's a tool to learn skills and generate capital that you can then deploy into actual assets. It's a temporary vehicle, not a destination. The tax system and how it actually works. Here's something that will make you angry. The tax system is designed to benefit business owners and investors, not employees. And it's completely legal. Kiyosaki explains that there are essentially different tax rules for different classes of people. Employees earn money and pay taxes, usually between 30 to 40% when you include all taxes. Business owners earn money, spend it on business expenses, which reduces their taxable income, and then pay taxes on what's left. Investors pay capital gains taxes, which are lower than income taxes. This is why wealthy people can have enormous incomes but pay relatively little in taxes. They're playing by a different set of rules, not illegal rules, just different rules that most people don't know exist because nobody teaches financial literacy. The poor dad believed that higher taxes on the rich were the solution. The rich dad believed that understanding the tax code and using it legally was just smart. Who was right? Well, one stayed broke and one got rich, so you tell me. The point isn't to cheat on your taxes. The point is to understand that the game has rules, and if you don't know the rules, you're going to lose. Working for learning, not for earning. Here's where Rich Dad Poor Dad gets really practical. Kiyosaki talks about working to learn, not to earn. Most people choose jobs based on pay and benefits. The rich dad taught him to choose jobs based on what skills he could acquire. He worked in sales to learn how to sell. He worked in different industries to understand different businesses. He worked in the Marines to learn leadership and discipline. Each job was a school, not a career. He was acquiring skills that he could later use to build assets and generate wealth. Think about the difference. If you work for money, you get paid, and then the value stops. If you work for learning, you acquire capabilities that compound over your lifetime. You're building human capital that can generate financial capital. This is why specialization can be a trap. If you're a highly specializing employee, you're very good at one thing in one industry. If that industry changes or that skill becomes obsolete, you're in trouble. But if you have broad skills in sales, negotiation, marketing, finance, management, the wealthy aren't necessarily smarter. They just have a different skill set. They know how to raise money. They know how to manage people. They know how to spot opportunities. They know how to calculate risk. These aren't skills you learn in school. They're skills you learn by doing. Fear and greed. Kiyosaki talks about how most people's financial lives are controlled by two emotions, fear and greed. Fear keeps you in a job you hate because you're afraid of not having money. Greed makes you think that more money will solve your problems, so you work harder for a raise or a promotion. Then fear kicks in again because you have more expenses, and the cycle continues. The wealthy feel these emotions too, but they don't let them make decisions. They acknowledge the fear, then think rationally about actual risk. They feel the greed, then think rationally about what will actually create long-term wealth versus short-term satisfaction. This is what separates people. Not intelligence, not work ethic, but the ability to think clearly about money despite the emotions it triggers. Most people never escape this cycle because they never learn to manage these emotions. They make financial decisions based on how they feel, rather than what actually makes mathematical sense. The power of financial education. Here's the core message of Rich Dad Poor Dad. Financial education is the foundation of wealth. Not the education system gives you, but real financial education. Understanding financial statements, understanding how businesses work, understanding how investments work, understanding taxes, understanding debt, understanding risk. With financial education, you can see opportunities that others miss. You can evaluate whether something is actually a good investment or just sounds good. You can avoid the traps that keep people broke. You can make decisions based on numbers rather than emotions or what everyone else is doing. Without financial education, you're basically financially blind. You're dependent on financial advisors who may or may not have your best interests at heart. You're vulnerable to scams because you can't tell the difference between a real opportunity and a con. You're stuck in a rat race because you don't even know there's another way to live. Kiyosaki argues that financial education should be your highest priority investment. Not your house, not your car, not your education in your career field. Your financial education, because it's the one thing that can multiply every other resource you have. The asset column. So what do you actually do with all this? How do you stop being broke? Rich Dad Poor Dad gives you a simple mandate. Build your asset column. Every dollar you earn should be filtered through one question. Will this help build my asset column or my liability column? That new car, liability. That course on starting an online business, potentially an asset if it leads to income. That bigger apartment, liability. That rental property, asset if the numbers work. Your goal is to get to the point where your assets generate enough income to cover your expenses. That's financial independence. Not retirement, independence. The freedom to choose how you spend your time because money is no longer the constraint. And here's what people miss. You don't need to be a millionaire to be financially independent. You just need your passive income to exceed your expenses. If your expenses are $2,000 a month and you have assets generating $3,000 a month, you're free. If your expenses are $10,000 a month and you have assets generating $8,000, you're still trapped. This is why Kiyosaki emphasizes controlling expenses while building assets, not deprivation, but intentionality. Every dollar saved is a dollar that can buy an asset. Every asset generates income. That income can buy more assets. Mindset shift, but none of this works without the fundamental mindset shift. And this is what Rich Dad Poor Dad is really about. You have to stop thinking like an employee and start thinking like an owner. You have to stop seeing money as something you earn through time and start seeing it as something you create through value. You have to stop seeing security in a job and start seeing security in capabilities and assets. This doesn't mean everyone needs to quit their job and start a business. It means understanding that your job is a tool, not an identity. It means using that tool strategically to build something that gives you actual security. The poor and middle class work for money. The wealthy have money work for them. That's not motivational speaking. That's a completely different paradigm for how you relate to wealth creation. Why this makes people angry. Rich Dad Poor Dad is one of the most controversial personal finance books ever written. And I think I know why. It challenges the fundamental narrative that society tells us. Work hard, follow the rules, and you'll be rewarded. The book says that's not enough. The system isn't designed to make you wealthy. It's designed to keep you working. That's an uncomfortable truth. It's much easier to believe that you just need to work harder, get more education, be more responsible, because if that's true, you have control. But if the system is actually rigged, then everything you've been taught is a lie. And that's terrifying. So people reject it. They say Kiyosaki is a scammer, that his advice is dangerous, that he's just trying to sell courses. And maybe some of that is true, but it doesn't make the core insights wrong. The wealthy do think differently about money. Financial education is lacking. The tax system does favor business owners and investors. Assets do provide more security than jobs. These aren't opinions, they're observable facts. The question is what you do with that information. But now, if you're tired of being broke, here's what Rich Dad Poor Dad is really telling you. Start learning how money actually works. Read financial statements. Understand basic accounting. Learn about different types of investments. Study taxes. This isn't optional. It's the foundation. Start building assets, even small ones. Maybe it's a side business that generates a few $100s a month. Maybe it's dividend stocks that pay you quarterly. Maybe it's creating content online that generates ad revenue. Start somewhere. Control your expenses. Not deprivation, but intentionality. Every dollar you don't spend on liabilities is a dollar you can invest in assets. The difference compounds dramatically over time. Work for learning as much as earning. What skills are you acquiring? What do you understand now that you didn't before? How are you building capabilities that can create value? Think long-term. The rat race is all about short-term gratification. Financial independence is about the long-term thinking, delayed gratification, compound growth. Most importantly, change your relationship with money. Stop seeing it as something you work for and start seeing it as something you deploy strategically. Stop seeing wealth as something other people have and start seeing it as something you build deliberately. Will this make you rich? Maybe, maybe not. But it will absolutely change how you think, and that's where wealth actually begins. In your mind, not your bank account. Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't a blueprint. It's a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts are uncomfortable because they require you to question everything you thought you knew. But if you're tired of being broke, maybe it's time to question those assumptions. Maybe the reason you're broke isn't because you're not working hard enough or not smart enough. Maybe it's because you're playing a game whose rules you never learned. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's when things start to change.